Hi, I'm Ellery Womack, and today I'm joined by one of our partners, Siggy, to walk you through an e-commerce acceleration journey for Guide to Iceland. So I'm Ellery Womack. I'm Director of Engineering at Limelight Networks, and I'm joined by Siggy, who is a Senior Front-End Developer at Guide to Iceland. So we're going to go over a few topics today, starting with the importance of website speed, then moving on to Core Web Vitals, which is a defined set of metrics produced by Google. And lastly, we'll walk you through Guide to Iceland's journey to passing Core Web Vitals. So first, the importance of website speed, especially on mobile devices where users typically have low-powered devices, not as strong of a CPU. The internet typically isn't as stable. Even if you're on Wi-Fi, that doesn't really compare to being on wired internet. Having any performance glitches can really have a negative impact on your overall user experience. So what we found is for every 100 milliseconds of page speed improvement, we can see more page views per session, improvements in conversion rate, and also improvements in average order value. Obviously, if people are viewing more pages per session, they're going to add more things to cart. And so that's going to have a multiplicative impact on your total revenue on top of your conversion rate bump. So 3 years ago, Google rolled out the speed update, officially making page speed a ranking factor. So not only was SEO important, but now page speed was also a very important metric in determining where you rank in Google's algorithm if people are searching for your website. Then in May of 2020, Google announced that largest contentful paint would be included in the search algorithm. Largest contentful paint is one of the 3 metrics defined by Core Web Vitals that they also rolled out that year. And I'll go into more detail about that in the next section. Later on, in November of 2020, Google announced a plan to test a visual indicator that highlights pages and search results to have a great page experience. Again, this ties back to Core Web Vitals, where if you have a fast site, then you'll have a green badge next to your page indicating that you have a fast website. Yellow would indicate needing improvement, and red would mean you need a lot of improvement. Like this is a low-performing website. And then starting in April of this year, Google launched the page experience update, making Core Web Vitals a ranking factor. So this was announced back in 2020, and this year it's actually gone into effect where Core Web Vitals are affecting your search rankings. So what are Core Web Vitals? Let's talk through this a little bit. So the 3 metrics that define Core Web Vitals are loading, interactivity, and visual stability. So the first one is the largest contentful paint. So the largest contentful paint is the amount of time it takes for the largest visible element above the fold to render. Typically, this would be like a hero image or a call to action on a page. The next is first input delay, which is a measure of how fast your site responds once a user tries to interact with it. And that could be a scroll, a click, a hover. So if you have a lot of pixels on your site or third-party analytics or event handlers, that can really impact your first input delay score. And the last is visual stability, or as we call it, cumulative layout shift. This is a measure of how much things shift around on the page while content is loading. It's very important that you would pre-allocate space for all of the elements on your page so that as content is loading, users don't try to interact with something and then have it shift on the page and then they're interacting with the wrong element. So all of these are search signals for page experience, along with being mobile friendly, providing safe browsing, HTTPS, and no intrusive interstitials, which are things like pop-ups. So just to talk through, what does it take to get to a good state on these Core Web Vital metrics? So first input delay, any user interaction needs to take no longer than 100 milliseconds before the page will respond in order to be considered good. And obviously a poor score would be taking over 300 milliseconds. For largest contentful paint, like I mentioned, this is the largest image that's above the fold. On mobile, you need to achieve a score of at least 2.5 seconds for getting that element painted and not changing in order to achieve a really good LCP score. And lastly, cumulative layout shift. This is more of a composite measure of things shifting around on the page, how many elements, how long they're shifting. And so as you can see, we have 2 different images here. One that shows, we have a hero image for a product, and then down below it, we have multiple smaller thumbnails. It's important to make sure that, the page doesn't shift while this content is loading in. So all of these shifts will be added up. And if you have a single page application, every page navigation will actually add on an incremental layout shift score, which can be very punitive. So why does this matter? First of all, 73% of e-commerce revenue comes from search and referral. So lots of pay-per-click and referral links. And if people are being navigated to your page and the initial page load has a really bad experience, then you're not really getting a lot of bang for your buck for all of your marketing efforts. If you are on the top 3 organic search results, there's a 55% click-through rate, so you're more likely to get clicks if you rank up, especially in the top 3. And lastly, we've found a 24% reduction in page abandonment or bounce rate whenever you have a website that's passing Core Web Vitals for all 3 metrics. So I'll pass things off to Siggy so you can walk through how, working with Layer Zero, Guide to Iceland was able to take their site from being in the poor category to passing Core Web Vitals and achieving a 99 Lighthouse score. Thanks, Siggy, for taking us through that journey. So let's talk about why Layer Zero is your solution to improving site performance and really driving all of your website's KPIs in the right direction. So we work with a lot of other companies, not just Guide to Iceland. So you can take a look at Shoe Carnival and Shop Akira, where for both of these websites, we were able to get double-digit improvements percentage-wise in their conversion rates, which led to big bumps in revenue and also organic traffic. For both Kate Spade and Revolve, we were able to achieve 90% or better improvements to first page loads, and that attributed to pretty big jumps in revenue per user for both of those websites. Our platform has 3 different tiers. So first of all, we have a free tier. If you would like to just get Core Vital run data off of your website, you can drop a simple script on there and set up an account in Layer Zero, and you'll be able to look at any of your run data. It can be live, it can be today, the past week, or up to 28 days of site aggregation. And we'll even split this by certain page routes or certain device types, so you can fine tune where you need to go optimize your website. Then we have 2 other service offerings. The first is Layer Zero for traditional sites. So these would be non-headless websites. If you have a monolithic website where you'd like to put Layer Zero in front of it, take advantage of Core Vital RUM, Edge.js, caching to cache all your dynamic data, start caching some API calls. We can help you do that through Layer Zero for traditional sites. And there's, in a very general sense, a direct correlation between your cache hit ratio for all of your site content and your scores on Core Web Vitals. And then lastly, we have Layer Zero for headless websites, which if you're on a traditional site, this can be an iterative migration to page by page, move things over and set up routing rules in the Layer Zero platform so that routes that have been migrated go to one site and anything that has not yet been migrated still hits the old site. Or if you wanted to do a new site from scratch, we can help you get started with that as well. And lastly, if you have a website and you want to see, is Layer Zero a good tool for you? Can we really help you drive site performance and hopefully get more customers on your website? Go to the above link, limelight.com/LP/ICS, and request a free site audit. So we'll go through your site, point out anything that we see as big impediments to you improving your site scores, and we'll even do a disqualifier process where we'll put Layer Zero in front of your website, make a few optimizations, and then give you a good benchmark for the minimum amount of performance improvement you would expect to see by moving your website over to Layer Zero and then making some necessary tweaks to make certain pages cacheable and able to be loaded much faster. And so we'll, the output of this would be a performance audit. We'll take some of your competitors and compare them to your current site to show here's where you are today, here's where your competitors are, this is where you could be, and walk you through the next steps for how you get your site from where it is today to where you want it to be in the future. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for attending this call.
Thanks, Ellery. Hey guys, I'm Siggy. I'm a senior front-end developer at Guide to Iceland. Guide to Iceland is Iceland's leading travel agency, which helps thousands of travelers each year experience the most amazing things that Iceland has to offer, including self-drive tours, cars, accommodations, and everything you need to make sure that you have an amazing time in Iceland. I'm going to talk to you today about to a high-performing site. And I want to start off just to giving you a brief overview of our timeline. What are we looking at from when the site went live to today? Guide to Iceland was launched in 2012. That was the first version of it, and it was a huge success, and it grew a lot in the upcoming years. A lot of features were added, and it kept growing and growing. And in early 2018, we identified that we have been growing way too fast, and we are starting to see a lot of different issues on the technical side, sort of growing pains, if you will, and the company decides to invest in R&D to try to solve some of these issues. And this is actually around the same time that Google starts announcing that they will be incorporating speed metrics into their ranking algorithm for Google search. A few things happened then, but on October 2020, we launched Guide to Iceland on layer 0. And then today we have multiple sites on layer 0. All are passing the Core Web Vitals, and most of them actually have a score of 99 on PSI. So we're gonna go over sort of early 2018 until today. So the first step in our sort of web acceleration journey is to identify what problems we were having. And this is sort of in the beginning of 2018 when we start talking about this. We had technical debt across the entire stack. We had been growing so much, adding in new features, and we had little time to take a step back, think about what we're doing wrong and how we can refactor and optimize to make sure that we're not digging ourselves into a bit too big of a hole. The front end was tightly coupled with the back end. We had a monolithic structure. You basically had to be a back end developer to be able to add anything to the front end. Everything was read directly from the database, which made things a lot more difficult. Deployments were very painful. We had code freezes and deployment windows. You know how it is. And sometimes we had to reverse deployments, and that was even more of a pain. We had slow development speed. The speed to market was terrible. The business felt like nothing was ever getting out. We had no edge caching, basically barely any caching strategy at all, and no routing strategy. We sort of hacked everything together to try to make it work without having sort of the broader picture in mind. And pages were all slow as a result of all of these things. And after Google announcing that they will be using speed as a ranking factor, we obviously became very worried about what would happen for our organic traffic when that actually happened. So the first step we took in trying to reduce some of these issues is more modernizing the architecture, and we actually decided to go headless. What does headless mean? It's basically just a fancy word to say that the front end is independent of the backend. It's decoupled away from it. The presentation layer of the website is a standalone application which gets all of its data from APIs to be able to display it to the customer. What are the benefits of this? It actually empowers developers instead of restricting them. They're not locked into the backend and dependent on trying to do database queries to get something to display on a website. It offers flexibility and complete ownership over the front-end architecture. So front-end developers can do whatever what they want. They have complete control over their destiny, and they can start doing complex things in the front end to try to create sort of user journeys and a good user experience instead of being limited by what the backend is doing. It sort of future-proofs your application. This is the future of web applications. It brings you sort of into the leading and bleeding edge of front end. It allows you to have highly scalable applications which can be deployed wherever you want, and it simplifies a lot of things by removing one part of the monolithic structure. Customers also see, or companies also see, increased conversion rates and lower customer acquisition costs, which means higher margins and more gross revenue. So let's take a quick look back at the pain points. We have actually eliminated 3 just by going headless. Front end is tightly coupled with the back end. Painful deployments, they're not painful anymore if you can, at least not for the front end. if you can deploy it independently. And the development speed grew exponentially. You empowered the front-end developers to sort of act on their own, and they can make decisions and do what they want without having to ask a back-end developer for help. Technical debt was still there across the entire stack, but we were at least limiting it in the front end. Next step was trying to figure out a hosting platform that helps us with the speed, trying to fix that last point there. We found Layer0 after a lot of research, and they sort of met a lot of the things we were looking for. They supported the framework we were invested in, Next.js, and were doing a lot of cool things that we were very interested in. They had support for serverless. That's something we were very interested in. They allow us to write JavaScript code, which will then be executed at the edge. That's for routing and caching and stuff like that. I'll talk more about that later. They have edge experiments, so you can do split testing at the edge, which is we have been utilizing for A/B tests. They have branch previews, so you actually preview each individual change before it goes to production, and you can have an edge URL, unique URL for each deployment. And they have real user performance monitoring, which you can use to when you're trying to optimize these pages, as we'll talk a bit later in this talk. Yeah, the benefits we saw, obviously, like they have a smart caching solution at the edge, which allows us also to use stale while revalidate, which we'll talk also later. And cache purging is super easy and super customizable. They offer us routing at the edge. We can do routing globally on a CDN, which allows us to have incredibly fast page loads. Simple deployments, very simple to deploy to Layer0. Just using a command line interface. It takes you 5 minutes to get you up and running. Real-time performance monitoring. They have a run tool, super simple to set up, and it gives you a lot of visual data about the core web vitals and all sorts of metrics such as cache hit ratios, and you can see why we're not hitting the cache here and there, and so you can try to look into these things when you're optimizing your page, both for Google and for just user experience in general. We have seen an increased search ranking and increase in organic traffic. That's of course also because of the Google update a few months ago, but a part of that was obviously getting that speed benefit when we went live on Layer0. A quick step back to the pain points. Now we've actually eliminated no edge caching and no routing strategy. And deployments were actually even easier now. We had a Kubernetes setup before we went to Layer0. Now it's serverless, it's super easy to deploy. So the last point here is sort of pages were slow. They were still slow. They were obviously a lot faster after going to Layer0. But we also needed to do some optimization, not just on the Layer0 platform, just on the application level. I'm going to go through a few points that we did over the course of months. So website optimization is it's a bit different when you are trying to optimize for core web vitals. It's not like when you're doing React optimizations where you're trying to minimize re-renders and stuff like that. You're trying to look into these metrics and trying to figure out how these metrics are affecting real users that are out there. And this has to have buy-in from the entire company. The entire company has to have faith in what you're doing. You have to align both the developers and the business that this will take time, it takes effort. And you have to both parties have to understand why we're doing this. We're doing this to increase organic traffic on our site, which will then increase the conversion rate and hopefully make us more money. So I'm going to go through a few things that we actually did. This is not the entire list. We spent months on this, but these are sort of the highlights of what we did. We incorporate server-side rendering. This is something you get with Next.js. Server-side rendering just means that you generate the HTML on the server, do all the data fetching and all the heavy lifting on the server, and then ship a fully functional page to the client. It removes the necessity for users to having to send all these requests on the client. And this also means that you can cache the HTML at the edge using the Layer 0 platform. So that means you can have a fully functional page served at nodes all around the world, and you can have sub-second page loads, which helps tremendously with metrics like large, just contentful paint. We optimized our JavaScript bundles. We made sure we're trying to split it up efficiently. We actually found out that having too many chunks is not very efficient. So having the right amount of chunks, the right amount of size, you have to play around with this a bit. Only load what you need for the initial load, and then try deferring all assets, third-party scripts as late as possible if you don't need it at the initial load. We incorporated lazy loading all over the application. The rule was sort of, if we can't see it, we don't need to load it. We do this by using the intersection observer API, stuff like that, to load stuff when you scroll images, load entire sections of the page, maybe if that's something that we were interested in, just by incorporating that into our application. And this helped a lot with smaller HTML size, fewer network requests, which means that first input delay was better, and also largest contentful paint. We optimized our images. We have a lot of images on Guide to Iceland, and we were trying to make sure that we were not letting users download huge amount of images, like megabytes of size. Trying to optimize for each device and making sure that to reduce the quality as much as possible, because that makes the image smaller. And if the image is below the fold, lazy load it. We don't need it until a user is scrolling and wants to see that image. We also actually are inlining images that are above the fold for the large contentful paint, to make sure that we don't even need to send a network request for that image. It's inlined into the HTML, which means we can immediately, once the HTML has been parsed, we can start showing that image, which takes that LCP metric as soon as possible. We use skeletons when doing client-side navigation. This is to make sure that you make space for the content, so to avoid the content from shifting. We've all seen pages where things are jumping around because content is being loaded in dynamically, and that hurts both the user, and Google is going to punish you with a bad CLS score. We removed web fonts on mobile. We had a lot of issues with CLS on mobile because in order to have the page load as fast as possible, we didn't have the font loading as render blocking. So that meant that first, when the user visited the page, he saw the default font in the device and browser. Then once the fonts were loaded, we applied them, and that meant that the font size could differ because of width and stroke length and letter sizing and whatnot. And that meant sometimes the text could jump to the next line and the entire content would shift, causing CLS issues. We were trying to optimize cache hits, like I said before. Super important to get that sub-second load is to have cache hits, and then you need to make sure that you have a proper cache key structure so you can purge the cache easily if something is wrong or content needs to be updated. And that also incorporates the next point, stale while revalidate, which means that you can serve the cache. You can mark if the cache is stale, you can still serve it for a single user, but update the cache in the background. So when the next user arrives, he's going to get new content. And that means that we're optimizing the cash hit ratio again. Yeah, that was sort of a highlight overview of what we did. This took months, and it was a lot of effort with a lot of help from our friends at Layer Zero, who have experts in this field. So I would definitely recommend, if you're having some of these issues that we are having, reach out to them. They will definitely know what to do. And here are the sort of the metrics. We used to have a lighthouse score of around 40. That was in 2018. Now we're on 99. LCP is under 1.7 seconds. First input delay is almost non-existent, 0.4 seconds, and CLS 0.01. So fantastic to see all these green metrics after such a huge effort on our end. And now we just have to maintain this and make sure we don't, the score doesn't gets worse. Thanks for tuning in, guys.